Tales by Ebi. Take this girl and throw her away, Namdi shouted, his voice shaking the walls of the small hut. His face was red with anger, and his hands trembled as he pointed to the baby girl lying on the mat. His wife, Amora, stared at him, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe what he was saying. "But she's our child," Amora whispered, tears already filling her eyes. Her hands held the tiny baby close to her chest as if trying to protect her from the harsh words her father had spoken. Namdi shook his head, his face twisted with disgust. "She is not my child. Look at the mark on her back. This child is cursed, sent by evil spirits to ruin my life." Amora's eyes widened. She had seen the mark, a strange symbol that looked like a star, right in the middle of their baby's back. But how could Namdi think their own child was cursed? She was just a baby, innocent and sweet. "We should take her to the village elder," Amora suggested, her voice soft and hopeful. "Maybe they will tell us what the mark means. Maybe it's nothing bad." Namdi's face hardened. "The elder? You think he can help us?" "No. I've heard stories of babies with strange marks. They bring misfortune and sickness. Since she was born, my crops have withered, and my goats have fallen sick. I cannot afford to keep her here." Amora felt a deep pain in her heart, but she also knew her husband was not thinking clearly. The village of Umuake was small, and people talked about everything. Everyone knew Namdi as the man with the biggest yam farm. His crops were always the best, and he was respected for his hard work. But in the last few months, things had changed. The yams had stopped growing as they used to, and many of his animals had gotten sick. Namdi had begun to believe it was the baby's fault. Before the baby came, Namdi and Amora had been a happy couple. Namdi worked the farm every day, from sunrise to sunset, and Amora took care of their small home. They had married young, and for many years, they prayed for a child. The day Amora found out she was pregnant, they celebrated with their neighbors, dancing and singing until late into the night. When the baby was born, Namdi was overjoyed. He smiled as he held his little girl for the first time, naming her Chisholm, meaning God is with me. But his joy did not last long. Only a few days after Chisholm's birth, strange things started happening. The crops that once flourished on his farm began to die, and Namdi grew worried. Then one evening, as Amora bathed the baby, she noticed the strange mark on Chisholm's back. She showed Namdi, and from that moment, everything changed. Namdi could not stop thinking about the stories he had heard growing up. Tales of babies born with special marks who brought disaster upon their families. Now, his crops were failing, and his animals were dying. In his mind, the mark was a sign that his baby was the cause of it all. "I won't let you hurt her," Amora said firmly, standing up and cradling the baby tightly in her arms. "She is innocent. If you take her away, the gods will punish us." Namdi's eyes softened for a moment, but then the anger returned. "I will not watch my family suffer because of a cursed child." He stormed out of the hut, slamming the door behind him. Amora sat down, rocking little Chisholm gently as the baby cooed softly in her arms. Tears ran down Amora's cheeks. What was she going to do? She loved Namdi, but she could not understand why he was so blinded by fear. This was their child, their precious daughter. As the night fell, Amora decided to seek help. She wrapped Chisholm carefully in a cloth, tied her firmly to her back, and left the hut, walking quickly through the dark paths of the village. She made her way to the home of Mama Neka, the village midwife and healer. Mama Neka was known for her wisdom and knowledge of ancient traditions. She had helped bring many babies into the world, including Chisholm. Amora trusted her deeply. When she arrived, Mama Neka was sitting outside her small hut, humming a tune and picking herbs. Her sharp eyes looked up as Amora approached. "Ah, Amora," she said, smiling warmly. "What brings you here so late at night?" Amora knelt down in front of her and quickly explained everything: the strange mark, Namdi's anger, the dying crops, and the baby's constant crying. Mama Neka listened carefully, nodding her head slowly. She stood up and asked Amora to bring the baby closer. Gently, she examined the mark on Chisholm's back, her eyes narrowing in concentration. After a long moment, she sighed and looked up at Amora. "This is not a curse," she said softly. This child has been chosen by the gods for a special purpose. Amora's eyes widened in surprise. Chosen? What do you mean, Mama Neka? The mark on her back is a blessing, not a curse. It means that she has a destiny, a powerful one. But such a child will face many challenges, and those around her must protect her. You must be strong, Amora. Amora felt a small spark of hope light up in her heart. What should I do, Mama Neka? Namdi wants to get rid of her. Mama Neka shook her head. Namdi is blinded by fear, as many men are when they face things they do not understand. But you must fight for your child. She is a gift, and the gods have placed her in your care for a reason. Amora nodded, feeling a sense of determination grow within her. She would not let Namdi throw their child away. She would protect Chisholm, no matter what. But as they spoke, in the shadows of the village, another set of eyes was watching them closely. Someone had heard the words spoken by Mama Neka and was already planning how to use this knowledge for their own gain. Amora returned home with a new sense of purpose, but her heart was still heavy. She knew Namdi would not be easily convinced. As she approached the hut, she could hear him pacing inside, his heavy footsteps thudding on the ground like a storm about to break. When she entered, Namdi stopped and turned to face her, his eyes bloodshot from anger and exhaustion. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "I told you to get rid of that child, yet you still carry her with you." Amora took a deep breath, standing tall with Chisholm still bundled securely on her back. "I went to see Mama Neka. She told me something important, Namdi. Chisholm is not cursed. She is blessed." Namdi's face twisted with disbelief. "Blessed," he scoffed. "What kind of blessing brings death to my crops and sickness to my animals?" Amora stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Mema Neka said that the mark on her back is a sign. Chisholm has been chosen by the gods for something great. This is not a curse, Namdi. We must protect her. Namdi was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in confusion. The words from Mema Neka carried weight, but his mind was clouded with the misfortune that had befallen them. How could this be a blessing when everything around them was falling apart? "You trust the words of an old woman more than the truth in front of your eyes," he said finally, shaking his head. "I've lost everything, Amora. I can't afford to listen to stories." Amora's heart ached for him, but she knew she had to stand her ground. "I will not throw our child away, Namdi. I love you, but if you force me to choose, I will protect her." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint, steady breathing of Chisholm, who slept peacefully despite the tension in the air. Namdi stared at Amora, his hands clenched into fists. He was torn between his fear of the unknown and the love he still had for his wife and child. Before he could respond, a loud knock echoed on the door. Namdi and Amora exchanged puzzled glances. It was late, and no one usually visited them at this hour. With a hesitant step, Namdi went to the door and opened it. Standing in the doorway was Ike, a young man from the village, his face pale with worry. He was out of breath, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. "Namdi, Amora, you must come quickly," Ike gasped, his voice trembling. "What is it, Ike?" Namdi asked, his anger momentarily replaced by concern. "It's the village elder, he has fallen terribly ill. He's asking for you both, especially for your daughter, Chisholm." Amora's heart skipped a beat. The elder was the most respected man in the village, known for his wisdom and guidance. If he was asking for them, something serious was happening. Namdi's face darkened with confusion. "Why would he ask for Chisholm? She's just a baby." "I don't know," Ike replied, shaking his head. "But he mentioned the mark, the same mark on her back. He said it's important, something about an ancient prophecy." Amora felt a chill run down her spine. Prophecy? What could this mean? Without wasting any more time, she grabbed a shawl and wrapped it around herself and Chisholm. Namdi, still trying to process everything, followed behind, his mind swirling with a mix of fear and uncertainty. They walked quickly through the village, the night air cool against their skin. The streets were quiet, but the sound of distant drums could be heard from the direction of the elder's house. It was as if the village was preparing for something important, though they had no idea what awaited them. When they reached the elder's compound, they found a group of villagers gathered outside, whispering among themselves. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and as soon as Amora and Namdi entered, all eyes turned toward them. The elder lay on a mat, his breathing shallow and his eyes closed. His skin was pale, and he looked much older than the last time they had seen him. Beside him knelt the priest of the village, a man named Okeke, who had always seemed distant and mysterious. He was chanting softly, holding a bundle of strange herbs in his hands. The priest looked up as they entered, his gaze settling on Chisholm. "You've come," he said in a deep, raspy voice. "Bring the child closer." Amora hesitated, but Namdi gave her a slight nod, his eyes filled with curiosity. Slowly, she stepped forward, carrying Chisholm in her arms. The priest's eyes narrowed as he looked at the mark on Chisholm's back. He placed his hand on the elder's forehead, whispering a few more words before turning to the crowd. "The mark this child carries, it is the symbol of the chosen one," the priest said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone listen closely. "She is the one the gods have spoken of. Her destiny is tied to the fate of this village." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some looked fearful, others curious, but no one spoke. Namdi stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "What does this mean for my family? My crops are dying, my goats are sick. How is she a blessing if we are suffering?" The priest turned his gaze to Namdi. "Suffering always comes before great change. The gods are testing your strength. Your daughter's life is not an ordinary one, Namdi. She is meant for something greater than you can imagine. But if you abandon her, the curse you fear will fall upon you." Namdi's heart raced. Could it be true? Could his daughter really be the key to saving them all? Or was this just another tale meant to fill them with hope while everything crumbled around them? Before he could speak, the elder stirred, his eyes fluttering open. His voice was weak, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "The prophecy is real," he whispered. "She will be the one to save us, but only if her family believes in her." Amora's grip on Chisholm tightened. She glanced at Namdi, her eyes pleading with him to trust what they were being told. The future of their family, and perhaps the entire village, rested on their shoulders. But as the elder's words echoed through the air, another voice rose from the back of the crowd. "Not everyone believes in this prophecy." A figure stepped forward from the shadows. The figure that stepped forward from the shadows was none other than Obinna, Namdi's childhood friend. His tall frame cast a long shadow in the moonlight, and his face was a mask of disbelief. Obinna had always been skeptical of village tales, superstitions, and ancient prophecies. He believed in hard work and logic, not the words of the elders or the mysterious priests. "I respect you, elder," Obinna began, his voice steady but firm. "But how can you ask us to believe that a baby with a mark can save our village? This is the real world, not one of those old stories. We are suffering, our crops are dying, and this child is the reason. Look at what Namdi has lost since her birth." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding their heads, others whispering under their breath. Namdi glanced at Obinna, torn between his old friend's words and the elder's prophecy. Doubts began to cloud his mind once again. Amora stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice was strong. "You are wrong, Obinna. This is not about what you believe or don't believe. Memarneka, the elder, and the priest all say the same thing: Chisholm is special. The gods have chosen her. We must protect her, not turn our backs on her." Obinna's eyes narrowed. "And if they're wrong, Amora? What then? Are we to lose everything because of a story? Are we to watch Namdi's farm turn to dust, watch the village starve, because we followed the words of people stuck in the past?" Before anyone could respond, the elder lifted a trembling hand, signaling for silence. The crowd quieted as his frail voice broke the tension. "The child is not the cause of your suffering," he said softly, his breath shallow but determined. "The suffering began because of our doubts, because we have forgotten the ways of the gods. This child will bring balance, but only if we have faith. The mark she carries is ancient, passed down through generations. She is the bridge between us and the spirits. If we reject her, our village will fall." Namdi's heart thudded in his chest. He looked at Chisholm, now awake in Amora's arms, her innocent eyes wide as she gazed up at him. Could this tiny, fragile child really hold the fate of the village in her hands? Obinna was not convinced. Elder, with all due respect, you are asking us to risk everything. We have lost too much already. There has to be another way without believing in superstitions. The priest, who had been silent, suddenly stepped forward. His deep voice resonated through the gathering. Obinna, you doubt the gods, but you have not lived as long as the elders have. You have not seen the power of the spirits. This child, he pointed to Chisholm, is a sign. The mark is proof. If you do not believe, you will bring ruin not only to yourself but to everyone here. Obinna crossed his arms, shaking his head. I will not believe in fairy tales. My family relies on me to make choices that are based on reason, not ancient myths. If Namdi wishes to keep this child and watch his farm wither, that's his choice. But I will not stand by and do nothing while my own family suffers. With that, Obinna turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing into the night. The crowd parted for him, watching as he disappeared into the darkness. Some villagers looked at each other, uncertain of what to do, while others whispered nervously, clearly unsure whether to follow Obinna's path or trust in the elder's words. Namdi stood frozen, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. Amora gently placed her hand on his arm, pulling him from his trance. Namdi, you must choose. Do you trust in our daughter or in Obinna's doubts? The crowd waited, holding their breath for Namdi's answer. Before he could speak, a sudden gust of wind swept through the village, rustling the trees and shaking the wooden doors of the huts. The air grew colder, and the sky, once clear, darkened with heavy clouds. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by the deep rumble of thunder. The villagers gasped, some falling to their knees, believing the spirits were giving them a sign. The priest's voice boomed over the rising wind. The gods are watching. Namdi, the choice is yours. But know this, if you turn your back on the child, you are not only turning your back on your family but on the spirits themselves. Namdi swallowed hard. He felt the weight of the village's eyes on him, the pressure of their expectations. He glanced at Amora, who was watching him with hope and fear in her eyes, and then down at Chisholm, whose tiny hand reached up and wrapped around his finger. And in that moment, something shifted inside Namdi. He realized that no matter how much he had lost, no matter how hard things had been, he couldn't give up on his family. He couldn't give up on Chisholm. He took a deep breath, then spoke loudly so that everyone could hear. I will protect my daughter, Namdi said firmly, his voice cutting through the wind. She is my child, and I believe in the God's plan for her. I will not abandon her. Amora's eyes filled with tears of relief, and the priest nodded approvingly. The elder, too, smiled weakly, though his face was pale and his body trembled. But just as the villagers began to relax, a voice cried out from the edge of the crowd. It's too late, shouted a woman, her face stricken with panic. Look! Everyone turned toward the direction of her voice, and their eyes widened in horror. Far in the distance, where Namdi's farm stood, a strange, dark cloud was gathering, swirling ominously above the land. The ground beneath it began to tremble, and the once tall and proud yams seemed to wilt even further before their eyes. The curse is real, someone screamed. We are doomed. Namdi's heart raced. Could it be true? Had his choice brought more disaster? The priest stepped forward, his expression grave. The test has begun. The gods are watching. This is only the beginning. Namdi stared at the dark cloud, fear creeping into his heart once more. But then he looked down at Chisholm, her innocent eyes shining up at him, and he knew what he had to do. We will fight, he said quietly, but with determination. We will not give up. But the real question remained, how do you fight a curse from the gods? Obinna's face twisted in disbelief. This is madness. You're going to get us all killed. But before Namdi could respond, a strange light began to glow from Chisholm's back, right where the mark of the star was. The villagers gasped, stepping back in shock as the light grew brighter, casting long shadows across the ground. Amora held her breath, watching as the light from Chisholm's mark seemed to push back the dark cloud, stopping its advance. The baby, barely aware of what was happening, cooed softly, her tiny hand reaching out toward the swirling storm. The gods are with her, Mama Ada whispered, her eyes wide with awe. She is the chosen one. The cloud, once menacing, began to retreat, slowly dissolving into thin strands of mist, disappearing into the night sky. The ground stopped shaking, and the wind died down to a gentle breeze. The air was still, as if the world itself had paused to watch the miracle unfold. Namdi, Amora, and the villagers stood in stunned silence, the threat seemingly gone. But before they could breathe a sigh of relief, the priest spoke again, his voice low and grave. "This is only the beginning," he warned. "The gods have shown their power, but the true test is yet to come. You must be ready, for what is coming will test not only your faith but your strength." Namdi felt a chill run down his spine. The priest's words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. He looked at Amora, her face pale but determined, and then at Chisholm, whose mark still glowed faintly in the dim light. He had passed the first test, but what lay ahead was still uncertain. The gods were not finished with them, and Namdi knew that whatever came next, it would change their lives forever. But he also knew one thing for sure: he would protect his family, no matter the cost. As Namdi stood there, watching the dark cloud swirling over his farm, he clenched his fists. The village was in chaos, people whispering, running, and pointing toward the sky. Amora tightened her hold on Chisholm, her eyes filled with both fear and resolve. "What do we do now?" Amora whispered, her voice trembling. Namdi turned to the priest, his face tense with worry. "You said this was a test. But how do we pass it? What do the gods want from us?" The priest, Okeke, stared into the distance, his deep-set eyes narrowing as if listening to something no one else could hear. The wind whipped around them, growing stronger, as he spoke in a low, serious tone. "The gods do not ask for much. They want your faith. They want you to protect what they have given you, this child." He looked at Chisholm. "But they also demand sacrifice." Namdi's heart sank. "Sacrifice? What do you mean?" Okeke's gaze didn't waver. "To prove your faith, you must give up something dear to you, something you value more than anything. Only then will the gods be satisfied." Namdi felt as though the ground beneath him had crumbled. What could be more valuable than his family? His land was already failing, his animals sick. What else could he offer? Suddenly, an old woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her hunched frame was draped in faded cloth, and her grey hair flowed wildly in the wind. This was Mama Ada, the oldest woman in the village, known for her sharp tongue and sharper mind. She looked directly at Namdi, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "It is not just about giving up what you love, Namdi. It's about proving that you trust the gods enough to let go of your fears. The child has been chosen, and you must guide her. Your wealth, your crops, those are just earthly things. What the gods want is for you to give up the fear that has controlled your heart." Namdi stood frozen, Mama Ada's words sinking deep into his mind. His fear, the same fear that had made him question his daughter, the same fear that had made him doubt the gods, was that the real curse? Amora, still holding Chisholm tightly, stepped closer to Namdi. "Namdi," she said softly, "this is not about our farm. It's about our daughter, our family. If we don't have faith, how can we protect her?" Namdi's chest tightened as he looked down at Chisholm, her small, innocent face staring up at him, unaware of the storm surrounding them. She was a gift, not a curse. He had to believe that. Taking a deep breath, Namdi turned to the priest. "I will make the sacrifice," he said, his voice strong despite the doubt still lurking in his heart. "But I won't sacrifice my child or my family. I will give up my fear. I will trust the gods." The priest nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "Then you are ready." But before anyone could respond, a loud crack of thunder split the sky, and the dark cloud above Namdi's farm began to move slowly, but steadily, toward the village. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air filled with an eerie, low hum, like the breath of something ancient and powerful. The villagers gasped and backed away in fear, but Okeke stood his ground. "The gods are watching. Stay together. Show them that you will not break." Suddenly, from the edge of the crowd, Obinna returned, his face pale as he stared at the dark cloud approaching. He rushed up to Namdi, grabbing his arm. "Namdi, you have to stop this. The curse is real, and it's coming for us all." Namdi pulled his arm free, looking Obinna square in the eyes. No, Obinna. The real curse is our fear. We must stand together. If we turn away now, we lose everything.